I'm sorry I was interrupted before by the computer program. Evidently there's a time limit. I was talking about how oogenesis and spermatogenesis are different. And the last way that I was talking about is how gametes are released. And sperm are released continuously from the seminiferous tubules just by fluid movement. In females, the oocyte, the secondary oocyte, is released from a follicle because the follicle ruptures. So you have to have development of a follicle to get to the point where it will rupture in order to release the secondary oocyte. From there, once the secondary oocyte is released, it does follow the movement of fluid. Fluid that's in the peritoneal cavity will be propelled towards the uterine horn or uterine tube, and so the oocyte should follow that flow. It should go into the uterine tube. Okay, let's just sum up a little bit of the ovary function. So recall at the beginning of the lecture, I talked about the two phases of the ovarian cycle. The follicular phase, which happens before ovulation, and the luteal phase that happens after ovulation. And notice in the diagram at the top that we see the follicles are changing in the follicular phase. Not every single follicle, but a group of follicles are changing, and one specifically is becoming dominant, and that's the one that will ovulate an oocyte. During this follicular phase, the follicle cells that make estrogen are increasing in number, these granulosa cells. So during this follicular phase, you see a rise in the amount of estrogen produced and a pretty high spike that's due to this dominant follicle producing a lot of estrogen. That estrogen won't be just a local signaling molecule. It will enter the bloodstream, travel to the uterus, and control the uterine cycle. The next part to talk about is the luteal phase. During the luteal phase, we have the formation of this corpus luteum, which is sort of a remnant of ovulation, but it becomes functional. And it's functional because it produces a lot of progesterone. It also produces estrogen, but we're going to see that progesterone is really key in in which hormone controls the uterus, basically. So the progesterone level is really high as long as the corpus luteum is intact. If it degenerates to the corpus albicans, then progesterone levels and estrogen levels are going to go down. So let's look at the functions of these ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone. What estrogen does locally is support the growth of the follicle, but also the development of the oocyte. That's locally. But when it becomes a blood-borne hormone, it's traveling through the bloodstream. In the uterus, it causes thickening of the endometrium, which is ideal because you just released an oocyte, right? And you want to prepare the uterus for the possibility of an embryo implanting. The function of progesterone is to maintain that endometrium as well as any forming placenta during pregnancy. So progesterone really functions to support a developing embryo and fetus. It does so by acting on the lining of the uterus to secrete a lot of glycogen-rich fluid and increase the blood supply through vasodilation. It also suppresses contraction of the uterus, which is important if you want the embryo to stay in there and develop. So those two hormones, estrogen and progesterone, will be the topic of our lecture on the uterus and the uterine cycle. Thank you, and I'm sorry you had to reload another recording. Thanks for listening.